Good evening, everyone. Hope everyone's having a good night so far. Before we begin, let's go ahead and start with a word of prayer. Dear God, we thank you for this day that you have blessed us with. So thankful for this hour that we get to come together and study your word together. I pray that we can leave edified and that we can all continually have the same goal in mind to go to heaven and study at home and grow with our families and read our Bibles and meditate on your word daily, Lord. We're so thankful for Jesus, through whom we're saved, and it's in his name that we pray. Amen. Alrighty. So, this is too small. All right. On Sunday, we were introduced to the concept of tithing. Darrell went through some early examples that we see in the book of Genesis. Tithing becomes an obligatory concept, an obligatory law in the law of Moses, in the Old Covenant. So that's what we're going to go through today, is some of these Levitical laws that we see. We're going to start in Leviticus chapter 27 if you want to read with me. And this is where we see the introduction of tithing in the law. So you can go ahead and turn to Leviticus chapter 27 if you like. I'm going to start reading in verse 30. Thus, all the tithe of the land, of the seed of the land, or fruit of the tree, is the Lord's. It is holy to the Lord. If therefore a man wishes to redeem part of his tithe, he shall add to it 1/5. For every 10th part of the herd or flock, whatever passes under the rod, the 10th one shall be holy to the Lord. He is not to be concerned whether it is good or bad, nor shall he exchange it. Or if he does exchange it, then both it and its substitute shall become holy. It shall not be redeemed. These are the commandments which the Lord commanded Moses for the sons of Israel at Mount Sinai. We'll go ahead and stop there. So these are the basic instructions for tithing. We see that there is a commandment to tithe. Who does the tithe belong to? The Lord. Tithing belongs to the Lord. It is holy to the Lord. It belongs to God. And we'll talk about this more in a minute because we're going to see the tithe go to different people. What was commanded to be tithed? Yeah, all those things. So we see the tithe of the land, of the seed of the land, or of the fruit of the tree. So basically, the harvest of your agricultural endeavors, and of the herd, the animals. What's the difference between picking an animal to sacrifice to the Lord and an animal that is being tithed to the Lord? Is there a difference in the process? Yeah, exactly. You didn't pick. So with the sacrifices, how do you pick an animal when you're picking a sacrifice? There were conditions. Depending on the sacrifice, determined what kind of conditions you had. But basically, every sacrifice was conditional. Even if it was a sacrifice of thanksgiving or fellowship, you still picked. You still did your best. You still picked the best one you could. As far as the tithing is concerned, you didn't pick. You picked the 10th one. So basically, as the animals are passing through, you're doing your tithe. Every 10th one was the one that you were going to tithe. It didn't matter if it was good or bad. Was substitution allowed for these animals? Could you substitute it? I like this one better. This one kind of has messed up a little bit. This one's better for God. I think I just want to substitute it. Could you do that? Yes, but provisionally.
Well, if I'm understanding what you're saying, in other words, if a man was to redeem any of his tithes, in other words, so if something, if he wants to take back, if he has to add an additional fifth to something else, in other words, he has to give something else, that he has to add to it, so he's putting that kind of forward, he wants to redeem tithes.
Yeah. Different of what I'm asking specifically. Could you substitute another animal? Could you substitute another animal? No, you could not. You could not. As a matter of fact, the way that they phrase it is like, yeah, you can substitute another animal if you want, but then you have to give both. So basically, what's being said is you could not substitute another animal. It had to be the 10th one. So we'll get into what almost called you Jonathan, his son's name. We'll get into what Darren's talking about in a minute, though. Okay, why do you think it didn't matter if it was good or bad? Doesn't God want the best? Why this time it doesn't matter? Any thoughts? It's speculative. Bible doesn't say. Any thoughts on this? That's definitely true, but God actually commands them that it doesn't. He says the 10th one, I don't want you to pick any which way or another. So that's the process, but God actually says good or bad doesn't matter. Every 10th one. Why wouldn't it matter, Darren or Daryl?
Yeah.
Get all the names messed up.
Because he's trying to make sure that it stays
That stays
because of where
random.
where it's going to go. It's not always going to go things like that. It's basically saying if you randomly pick the stuff coming out of your flock, then the people who end up receiving it as payment will get a representative sample of the same thing that you get. They're either getting worse than you have to put or better. So by just picking it, just saying, okay, every 10th one that passes through, which is in some ways meaning God's actually going to be picking because he's the one that determines which animals will go under your rod next. That way, by keeping it random, then the receivers of that gift ultimately are just going to get a random sample of
Yeah, and that's a great answer. That was one of the ones I had on my list here. It's not just going all to one place. It's kind of as this random aspect of it. This God is in control, even for the people who are going to be receiving it. The way you phrased it was really good in regards to just as the people, they kind of get their animals, they're born, they kind of get what they have. In doing it this random way, that those that are receiving it also kind of get what's coming every 10th. It's random in a sense. Yeah, that's one answer I had here. Any other thoughts? Why doesn't it matter good or bad? That's a good one. Any other possibilities? Any other thoughts?
Well, just to kind of touch on what Darrell was saying, is that it takes control out of man's hands and the person upon that really just belongs to God. And that's what God's trying to impress, right? That the tithe already belongs to God. It's not something that man that belongs to him and he's somehow giving it to God. It already belongs to him. And but God's requiring the tenth, to be taken out of man's control in this random aspect, so we can impress it upon him that really it's God's decision. It's God's to give it. You don't have a whole lot of say in how this works.
Yeah. Good answers. Good answers. Absolutely. And we'll end up talking about that a little bit soon as well. One that I like to bring up is maybe to avoid even confusion. If you have a day of sacrifice and a day of tithe, and they land on the same day, and the best is required, which offering gets the best? You know, so again, just throwing different possibilities out there. You could imagine you have, you know, the sheep that is the best of the best, yet if the tithing required the best and then the sacrifice required the best, you know, you could see how possibly that might add some confusion. Again, just additional ideas out there. But yeah, those are excellent answers. Were there exceptions? Could you tithe whatever you wanted? Yeah, it's pretty specific. It's pretty specific, but was there an exception? Darren had brought this up a moment ago. There seems to be an exception as far as tithing is concerned, right? Because what do you got? Like you mentioned earlier, you've got basically the fruits of the harvest of the land, and you've got the animals. And any time was any other tithe acceptable besides your harvest and animals? Yeah, I'm basically kind of talking about what Darren had mentioned about redeeming your tithe. So this concept of redeeming your tithe, what does that entail? So basically, let's say for one reason or another, either you felt that you could not or you did not want to give an animal or part of your harvest, you had the option to then give the money's worth, but there was a penalty. And what was that penalty? Yeah, you had to add a fifth to it. So basically, there were really no except. God wanted you to give of your harvest or of your animals, or you can choose to have a monetary substitution for it, but you had to add a fifth. There was a penalty for it, and I think that's interesting. Did God command a tithe on wages or money? Or wages tithe? Did we read anything about wages as far as money is concerned? I mean, back then you could consider livestock wages, but they also had coins. They also had money. Was money tithed? No. What we see here is money was not tithed. The commandment for tithing, again, was for the animals and for your harvest. The reason I wanted to bring that up is I think it's important to understand, because there are churches and denominations today that continue to tithe as they see commanded in the Old Testament. But they're not actually even tithing the way the Old Testament talks about, because people are tithing their wages. You know, they have a salary and they give 10% and divide that up however they do it. But you never paid money for your tithe. The only time you paid money was if you were redeeming something that you were supposed to tithe, and there was a penalty. You had to even add a fifth to it. So this was not something where you just tithe your wages. These were specific instructions. There were specific instructions for tithing. Why not tithe money? What temptation might there be if money was tithed? I feel like you're run-of-the-mill temptations, right? You got greed, robbery, and I believe ultimately missing the point of the tithe completely. And we're going to talk about this later, and Darren touched upon it a moment ago. Which basically everything comes from the God. If everything becomes a monetary exchange, you kind of lose sight of where your blessings are coming from. You can imagine back in that day, your blessings are pretty obvious if you think about it, because God has to provide the rain and the sunshine and the right weather and protect you from livestock. So people really can have this intimate relationship with their blessings and understanding that it comes from God. But if it's just a monetary exchange, you can lose sight of that. God never asked for money to be tithed. It was always the blessings that he has given you that you can, in regards to the livestock and the harvest. Any other thoughts on that before we jump to Numbers 18? All right, Numbers 18. I'm going to read verses 21 and 24. To the sons of Levi, behold, I have given all the tithe in Israel for an inheritance in return for their service which they perform, the service of the tent of meeting. For the tithe of the sons of Israel, which they offer as an offering to the Lord, I have given to the Levites for an inheritance. Therefore I have said concerning them, they shall have no inheritance among the sons of Israel. Okay, that was verses 21 and 24 of Numbers 18. Here we see tithes serving a specific purpose. Who and what were the tithes used for? Yeah, it was given to the Levites in return for the service they do for the tent of meeting. It was to be their inheritance. And we touched upon this, but I thought we just said that the tithes were for the Lord. How are the tithes both for the Lord and for the Levites at the same time? Tithing's for the Lord, tithing's for the Levites. How are both simultaneous? Do you need to be in that service in order for it to still be for God? Because later we're going to get into some different people that also receive tithes. So is it just because they served God that it was considered to the Lord, or can there be more to that? How are the tithes both for the Lord and for the Levites at the same time? Yeah, I think you're right, but I'm kind of looking for something else. Okay. Yeah, that's a lot. Yeah, that's a lot closer of what I was thinking about. And I think this will be more important when we get later on, and we're going to start talking about other uses of tithes that we see. There's other instructions for tithes, and we're going to get to that towards the end of the class. But I think it's an important concept to understand because we have similar ideas in the New Testament that we'll talk about on Sunday. But we give to the Lord too, right? So the point is that when they're tithing, it is for the Lord. But then the Lord gives the tithes to the Levites as an inheritance. So there's this relationship between giving, or the giving is for God, but God has established certain parameters in which that tithing or the blessing then gets distributed. So the tithing is for the Lord. The whole point is you are giving to God, but then God has established in the law, as we're reading now, for the tithes to be used in a certain way. So that's kind of my breakdown of that, because the Levites are serving God, but I don't think the connection is because the Levites are serving God, giving to the Levites is as if you're giving to God. I think the idea is you're giving to God, and God has established who's gonna get the tithes, ways of using the tithes once it's been given to God. Does that make sense? Okay. All right. It says here that the Levites had no inheritance. What was the benefit of having an inheritance? You remember? It's not something we talked about too much, but it's brought up here, so I feel it might be nice to talk about it for a minute. What was an inheritance, and why was it important? Yeah, that's the idea. And we've read of different stories in the Bible about getting an inheritance. That was a big deal of that culture. You know, you had land, your fathers had land, they pass away, you get the land, you get the inheritance, you get the blessings that they've had, that they've worked for. But the Levites, they're in service to God continually. They have their duties. They don't have land. They weren't given an inheritance. Their duty and honor was to serve the Lord and perform their ritualistic duties for the people. And I do think we see, if we think about it, there is a sense in which God, as their father, provided for them as a father provides for their house as an inheritance. So they didn't have an inheritance, but God provided for them as their father, just as any other person, their father would provide for them their inheritance. So God provided for his servants, for the Levites here. Okay. Any other comments before we jump to verse 26 and 29? All right, verse 26 and verse 29 of the same chapter. Moreover, you shall speak to the Levites and say to them, when you take from the sons of Israel the tithe which I have given you from them for your inheritance, then you shall present an offering from it to the Lord, a tithe of the tithe. Verse 29, out of all your gifts you shall present every offering due to the Lord, from all the best of them, the sacred part from them. Were the Levites excused from tithing? Were the Levites excused from tithing? Yeah, they tithe too. They tithe too. You know, and this is again going on to the whole thing of tithing. Tithing wasn't just for the priest. The priests also tithe. The Levites also tithe, and we'll talk about some other uses coming up. But they had to tithe as well. They had to tithe of the tithe. So they received the tithe from the people, and then they had to tithe of that tithe. Okay. Yeah, I had interpreted that differently in my mind, but now that you and Daryl have bring it up, I guess I can see how that would go to the priest. I pictured them all doing it, and Aaron was also involved. Him as, because he was the high priest. I thought it was more of him as high priest would then present that tithe, but that makes sense what you guys are saying. So the Levites would do it, and it would go to Aaron and his sons. Is that what you're saying? I could see that. That's not how I interpreted it, but I can totally see that. Yeah, I mean I can see it. Yeah, that's how he's picturing it.
Aaron shared with it as a Levite, and then Aaron was responsible for that 10% and 1%, and whatever else it was. So
Right, yeah, yeah. Well, what is clear is that basically everyone tithed, including the Levites, including, they were not excluded from tithing, even though they were beneficiaries of the tithe itself. So, just something that everyone was involved with. Okay. Same group of verses we just read. Was there a difference between the Levitical tithing and the Israelite tithing?
Verse 30 gives the impression that the Levites tithe the best.
Yeah, that's the difference. So as the Israelites, their tithing was more random. The Levites, they had the responsibility after they received the tithe to pick the best of it to tithe. So that's the biggest difference. That's the biggest difference here. Okay. If there's no other thoughts, we can jump to Deuteronomy chapter 14. Deuteronomy 14. And I'm going to read verses 22 and 23. 22 and 23. You shall surely tithe all the produce from what you sow, which comes out of the field every year. You shall eat in the presence of the Lord your God at the place where he chooses to establish his name, the tithe of your grain, your new wine, your oil, and your firstborn of your herd and your flock, so that you may learn to fear the Lord your God always. Okay? Here, it doesn't, sometimes you read the Bible, it's like, kind of wish there was like an introduction and kind of setting up so you kind of knew exactly what was going on. But when we're reading these couple verses here, what's actually happening is there's this yearly feast that's going to be taking place where all of Israel would tithe and then eat in the presence of the Lord. So you've got these different tithes that we're seeing, and here's one where it involves a feast yearly where all the produce would be tithed, and they were to eat in the presence of the Lord. So here we have this communion feeling involved with tithing. Similar feeling and idea of the fellowship sacrifice, the Thanksgiving sacrifice, where you're communing with God, this idea of fellowship. Okay? So what wasn't tithed? Here's a tithing festival, but not everything was tithed. What was tithed? Let's do that. What was tithed? Grain and fruit. Grain and fruit. And the other food of the festival appears not to have been tithed. So you tithe the grain and the fruit, but you've got things like you had the new oil, new wine, the firstborn of herd and flock. So again, here's a festival of basically of tithing, but only part of it was tithed. Okay? What do you think the purpose of this tithe feast was? It seems everything had a purpose thus far, right? So you had tithing, it served the priests and the Levites, no inheritance. And here you've got this feast here. What do you think the purpose would be, or a purpose possibly, for this type of festival, for this type of tithing festival? Yeah. I think you're right. I think those two words you said about being a community and then enjoying in the blessings are the biggest aspect of it. I think it was, again, to remind the people that everything comes from God. That everything comes from God. Tithing was not just a way to provide, but was also a way to be reminded you are being provided for. And I think that this feast, this feast may have served that purpose. Yeah, and it's a beautiful thing to see that what God has always wanted from us in our relationship with each other, and our relationship with each other and God has always really been the same, and that's fellowship and a closeness with Him. And again, the way it's worded is that they did this tithe and this feast, and then it says they ate in the presence of the Lord. So it's this idea of coming together, eating in the presence of the Lord. It sounds like an intimate ordeal, intimate festival, which I think is a beautiful thing. All right, let's go ahead and read verses 28 and 29. 28 and 29, same chapter. At the end of every third year, you shall bring out all the tithe of your produce in that year, and shall deposit it in your town. The Levite, because he has no portion or inheritance among you, and the alien, the orphan, and the widow who are in your town shall come and eat and be satisfied, in order that the Lord your God may bless you in all the work of your hand which you do. All right. Thus far, we've seen the tithe for the priest, the tithes of the priest, the tithes for the feast. What was this tithe for? What was this tithe for? Yeah, this was a tithe for the poor, basically. Who was included? Anyone else? Yeah, and basically strangers, basically. How often was this tithe? Every 3 years. So every three years, this was another tithe where we would see that the orphans and the widows, strangers, foreigners, they would come. The Levites would all come together and partake in this feast. And again, we're going to have the whole point of this is to apply this to kind of sets the ground, right? Because this was what? How much before the actual new covenant comes here? So this is hundreds of years before we get the new covenant. And again, this is the whole point of this is to kind of show us that some of these underlining concepts have always been there. Nothing is new in regards to what God really wants from us, the way He wants us to think about people and take care of people. He has always provided a way to take care of those in need. And what's interesting is that also included here are the strangers, are the sojourners, those that are not of His people. So again, it did not only benefit the Israelites. Yeah, absolutely. I could see that as also being a way of reminding them to not elevate themselves. Here they are, their hard work, and here's this grand feast, and those that are not of them are included. Tithing, it was, if you're just thinking about what it took physically, it wasn't hard to do. It was just giving a tenth. You can do that easily. So to speak, but yet it was a meaningful commandment from God. It was a way to provide for the poor, but more importantly, I think it was designed to remind the people where their wealth and prosperity was coming from. Couple of verses I'd like to just kind of add here at the end. You got Proverbs 3 verses 9 and 10. It says, "Honor the Lord with your wealth and with the first fruits of all your produce. Then your barns will be filled with plenty, and your vats will be bursting with wine." Again, it's this concept of knowing where our gifts are coming from, where our blessings are coming from. As we have been blessed, God wants us also to honor the Lord with what we have. And you see promises of blessings as well. One final verse I wanted to bring up was in Malachi chapter 3, verses 8 and 9. And again, this is just to hammer home. We've talked about this, but in closing, just to hammer home, really how tithing was always just giving God to what already was His. All right, Malachi chapter 3, verses 8 and 9. Will man rob God? Yet you are robbing me. But you say, how have we robbed you? In your tithes and contributions. You are cursed with a curse, for you are robbing me, the whole nation of you. So, how can you rob God? You're the one giving to Him. You're giving Him. Well, the whole point is that your tithes they don't belong to you. God, the whole concept is you are giving to God what is already His. And that concept actually is not any different than what we have today. And, when we talk about the collection up here sometimes, or we're talking about giving, we have the same type of ideas where we kind of always are reminded that our blessings come from God, and ultimately they are as good as His. On Sunday, we're going to talk about giving in the New Testament, the New Covenant. Any final comments or questions before we close out the class? Okay. I will go ahead and let Chad do some announcements, and then we'll have somebody have a closing prayer? We'll jump into closing prayer.
Hey, just got a couple of announcements. Elijah Daniels, his fever has actually came back, so he's not doing too good. Ross Melvin, his situation is worsening pretty drastically, so let's keep them in our prayers. Dot Newman started her chemo treatments on Monday. She's pretty weak from that, and I think Jamie said that some of her family has had some damage that lives in Mobile. Their houses are still livable, but they've got some pretty good damage. So let's keep all these people in our prayers.